Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
I can't believe that such a young person is really as highly qualified as the references and diploma say. I am confused about your age. The future boss repeated this phrase several times in the last hour. The dialogue could have been called an interview, but it was more like an interrogation. Sitting at the oak table, a man in his 40s had already asked about 1,000 questions. He was not interested in simple, unambiguous answers. Max was interested in details. It seemed that he knew more about the girl than she knew at the moment when she crossed the threshold of the office and timidly said hello. Employers cared about all, even the smallest details of her life. Where and at what faculty she studied full-time or part-time, what grades she got, and whether the teachers appreciated the girl. The man clarified and wrote down in the diary the names of all the relatives Christina could name. He found out where she already worked and for what reasons she was fired, and also her attitude to pets and vaccinations. The only thing the man really didn't care about: references from past jobs. He stated that the former employer could write anything he wanted on the paper and not even have to thank him for it. It was just a paper that would not determine whether Christina would get a position as a caregiver or be left with nothing again. However, the man scrutinized the documents and then put them in a folder, pushed them aside, and looked at her carefully in the eyes. "Better tell me, beautiful child, why were you fired from your last job?" His gaze expressed complete distrust towards the girl. With every word, he wanted to catch her in a lie or point out her disreputable behavior. Christina sat across from this gullible man on the leather couch and wondered if she should continue the interview at all. She felt as if she were not applying for a position as a nurse for a sick old lady, but as if she were about to become an ambassador who would have access to state secrets. In spite of everything, neither fatigue nor the desire to get home and take a hot bath, Christina held herself with dignity. She politely answered her future employer's numerous questions and showed him impeccable patience and restraint. As a rule, this is how they want to see a person who will have to care for an elderly woman with a strong character. It is possible to understand employers in such a case. It is nice to realize that the nurse at the moment when her ward will show caprices and refuse to eat, will not put a pot on the head of an insane baka and will not knock on it to the colonels, but will only smile and continue with entreaties and tales to feed her from a spoon. For Christina, this kind of activity was not new. She had previously had the honor of watching over the elderly parents of wealthy people. Despite the fact that each of her wards was with its own complex character and certain requirements, today's potential boss pissed the girl off. And this despite the fact that in the first minutes Christina even experienced a slight sympathy for him. Max was really handsome, muscular body, swarthy skin, rough masculine chin, and full lips. All of this couldn't help but attract the girl's attention. Looking into his eyes, she seemed to drown. They were blacker than night, and surely ruined a large number of representatives of the opposite sex. It was enough only once to look at him, and it became clear that the girl disappeared. Even under his jacket, his broad shoulders, powerful arms, and muscles were noticeable. Really, you're right, Christina couldn't stand it. I'm really too young for such a high qualification. The girl began to rise slowly from the sofa. I think we will come back to this conversation in 10 years. And I will be old enough to meet your expectations. Christina in no way expected to hear his commanding tone. Max said loudly, "Sit down." Despite the fact that he was still not considered the girl's superior and had no right to raise his voice at her, she didn't dare disobey. There was something in his voice. What made Christina obey? She instantly sat back down on the couch and thought about the fact that with that kind of grip, he could command an army instead of casting sit-ins for his elderly mother. He looked the girl straight in the eye and said, "Do you really think I'm asking stupid questions?" Max swept the hall with his impossible eyes. It was quite difficult to bear their gaze. The girl did not want to lie. She wished to remain extremely honest with him, but she could not, and slowly said, "I suppose you have good reasons for that. I don't think it's out of idle curiosity. My mom's coming to stay with me for 3 months. She just got out of rehab, so she won't be able to stay home alone. She'll need a lot of attention and your patience. To be honest with you, she's not the best temperament." Max was silent for a few minutes. Then he turned to the window and thought hard. He continued as if he were talking to himself. "We haven't spent time together for a long time. My mother has been separated for over a year. Ever since her second husband died, I'd like to spend as much time with her as possible. But my profession requires full commitment. If I stop devoting time to work, I'll have to support my mother and fulfill her whims. I simply won't have the financial ability." His eyes were full of coldness. When Max took his gaze away from the window and looked at Christina again. "And believe me, if I have to ask stupid questions for hours just to find the right person, I will do it." At this point, the girl had the very plausible opinion that Max was used to torturing those willing to work for him. But he had found a nurse who was not timid. This girl would never let anyone treat her like this. She knew what humiliation and disrespect were, and so she had made a promise to herself that she would never let anyone feel that way about her. The girl grew up in an orphanage. She was an orphan and had no idea who her parents were. The educator told that mom and dad loved their daughter very much, but they had to fly far away to a star. It was from there that they watched Christina and were proud of her. Frankly speaking, there was nothing to be proud of especially. The girl from time to time attended classes at the university and changed one job for another. The only thing she was really good at was taking care of the elderly. They reached out to her and were ready to fulfill any requirements of doctors, but only under Christina's constant supervision. Several of her charges had already died. They were too old and learned. It fell to the girl to watch over them before they died. Christina was confident that she would easily find a common language with Max's mother. That is why, as soon as the information about the vacancy arrived, she, without hesitation, went to the interview. But now her patience was wearing thin. "Excuse me, Max," calmly said the girl, addressing the failed employer. "I'm sorry I'm not the right person for your mother's care. I can't waste any more time answering your many questions. I can't take another couple hours. It's not worth wasting your time. Not yours, not mine." With these words, the girl quickly got up from the couch. I can imagine what a beating she will get from the head of the agency, who gave excellent recommendations and sent her here. Lucy would have easily sent a more experienced and qualified girl to this position, but she gave her a chance. She repeatedly told Christina that she saw potential in her and wanted to help her realize it by all means. But Christina once again failed to live up to the expectations of her older comrade. It is very good to be beautiful, but only if you do not plan to get a servant in a rich house as a nanny, maid, nurse, or housekeeper. And for those who are going to get such a position, beauty becomes an incredible disadvantage. Potential employers are weeded out during the interview process. Rich men treat such girls with great enthusiasm, but the bigger it is, the higher the risk that their wives will definitely refuse to hire them. It is better to be a middle-aged gray mouse from an intelligent family. Young and not-so-gray girls are not in fashion today. And to this, Max Lucy directed Christina not only because she wanted to help, he is lonely. And therefore, when hired, no beautiful lady will not sit next to her and give valuable advice. The decision on whether the girl would follow his mother would be made only by Max. But there was no point in pondering about it anymore. The girl had missed another chance to get a job. The only consolation for Christina was that she understood why Max was lonely. Anyone would just run away from him to the ends of the earth. Because living with a bore is a difficult enough ordeal, and even good looks and a piercing gaze can't change that. Christina quickly left the territory of the mansion and sat down in a cab. Sadly, she thought about the fact that such luxury will have to forget about it if she can't find a job in the near future. She would even have to give up taking buses and walk. She was in no hurry to tell Lucy that she had failed. That news would have to wait until tomorrow. Besides, no one was kicking her out. Christina left the rich house on her own. The girl was already near her own house when a message came on her phone. Max wrote that she was hired and already tomorrow she could arrive by 9 o'clock. She had to go through the registration procedure and receive detailed instructions. The boss's mother should arrive the day after tomorrow. She entered the mansion at 8:55. An earlier arrival would mean that Christina had voluntarily condemned herself to languish in front of her employer's office, showing undue interest. Being late would be even worse. Max would hardly want to deal with an unpunctual person who does not know how to calculate her own time. These are not qualities that would be worth mentioning in a resume and showing the boss on the first day to come 5 minutes early. Ideal solution. This period of time is enough time to gather your thoughts and put yourself in order if the need arises. Christina's experience in attending job interviews was so rich that she could write a book on how to behave properly to get a job. But she didn't use her knowledge herself for some reason. The door to Max's office was open, for better or worse. Whenever Christina had to knock on a closed door, she felt inexplicably awkward and could not cope with the feeling. Asking the question would do the trick. She was always terrified to hear an angry voice from behind the door, informing her that it was busy or that she had to close the door immediately. This is exactly what the teachers in the orphanage where the girl grew up did. It affected her fragile psyche and took its toll. It was noticeable that Max did not like to waste time. Despite the early hour, work was in full swing. And if in large companies by 9 o'clock employees only come to work and spend another hour to drink coffee with colleagues and wake up. In Max's case, it was different. It seemed that the work in his office never stopped. Since yesterday, from behind the door could be heard thundering and rolling of his voice. He was giving orders, at the same time pointing out mistakes and explaining what they led to. Most likely it was a telephone conversation, because there was no one in the office except Max. Christina realized that it was 8:59 on the clock. She should show herself on the doorstep of the office and draw attention to herself. Let Max see that she was not late, but arrived exactly at the appointed time. However, as soon as the girl made a step towards the door, she heard a woman's voice, and it came from the office. "Max, Bunny, are you wrong now?" From what she heard, the girl froze in shock, least of all Max. A stone impenetrable wall. He looked like a bunny, unless he was hiding in his closet or under his desk. Another Max. On autopilot, Christina took another short step and glanced fleetingly through the open door. No, there were two of them. A supervisor sat behind a desk, opening and closing a ballpoint pen. And next to him stood a tall, beautiful girl in a strong business suit. "You know how long it took me to get this contract for us?" The pretty girl in the skirts seemed to be indignant. She waved a pile of some papers in front of Max's face. "Now what? Now you turn your nose up. I agree. These guys may not be perfect, but who can boast of that quality?" Christina's greatest wish at this moment was to turn invisible. The scene, which she witnessed quite by accident, was clearly not meant for unauthorized viewers. The intimate bunny alone was worth what? The girl had the feeling that she had stumbled into someone else's bedroom without knocking and caught the couple in the middle of a not-so-applicable activity. Actually, it was their own fault. You shouldn't leave the door open. Anyone passing by here could quite unwittingly become a spectator of what was going on. Christina backed away from the office door, farther away, turned the corner, and took a breath. This morning, going to a new job, she did not plan to become a witness to an incomprehensible scene. The girl still couldn't decide what she had just seen. Whether it was a conflict of interest at work, or a quarrel between two lovers, or all together. Christina felt sincere joy not only from the fact that she had remained unnoticed, but also for the reason that her ward would arrive at her son's house only tomorrow. Old people tend to appear unexpectedly and at the most inopportune moment. And then, as if nothing had happened, to interfere in what is happening and give out valuable advice. If Max's mother were here right now, she'd probably ask, "What are you doing here? Nice ladies hiding from your boss or eavesdropping on these?" Christina immediately imagined this picture and a couple of faces from the office that would immediately turn in her direction and make such an expression that Christina involuntarily wanted to fall onto the ground. Try to tell and prove to anyone that it wasn't espionage, but a simple coincidence. No, she'd rather let what she'd seen and heard be her own little secret. The couple in the study were talking so loudly that the voices carried even into the hallway. However, it was hard to understand what they were talking about. Only one thing was clear: Max spoke in a calm, cold voice, and his interlocutor was constantly snapping and could not control her own emotions. "You're acting like an idiot. My bunny. Only a fool can afford to refuse such a lucrative offer." There was a rustling of papers. It was clear that the businesswoman was again showing him the papers lying on the table, considering it a weighty proof of her own rightness. Time was passing, and the hand of the watch, which was worn on Christina's wrist, came to the very top. However, the unfamiliar girl from Max's office did not even think to end either her monologue or not the most successful dialogue in her life. Christina didn't really want to interfere in a conversation filled with bunnies and goofs, but she realized that Max might think that the girl was late today, and therefore would be late all the time. Today it was especially important for the new caregiver to make a good impression on her boss. What was that involved? The girl didn't know yet, but she didn't see it as a big deal. He was just an employer, on whose decision depended whether she would get the job and the salary or not. At exactly 9 o'clock, Christina heard the voice of her boss. He clearly said that the meeting was over and would continue next time. Max explained to his interlocutor that now he had an important meeting, and therefore the person in the strong suit would have to leave his office. Most likely, the man had already gone to the door. Christina could make out every word he said. She could not believe her happiness. The boss turned out to be punctual, so what if he was a bore? This too has its advantages. However, the girl continued to bend her line. "All you have to do is sign the papers. Come on, you fool, sign it. And we'll make the evening just for the two of us." It's like she's stretching her words on purpose. "I've already told you firmly no, this deal is off. And besides, I'm very busy tonight." The girl, resentfully muttering something under her nose, flew out of the office and ran past Christina. Despite her speed, she managed to run her gaze distractedly over her. Only when she had already flown across the hall did she stop and quickly turn around. From the outside, it seemed that the information the stylish lady had gotten while running had just reached her brain. The business lady gave Christina a hard stare. No one even tried to hide dislike and surprise. The new nurse did not pretend not to notice the interest in her, but even nodded to her boss's business partner as a sign of greeting. She was particularly interested in who could afford to call Max a bunny and a fool at the same time. Christina assumed that they would often have to run into each other within the walls of this house, and therefore it was better to prepare for these meetings. The boss's supposed girlfriend looked dignified. The first thought that crossed Christina's mind was the realization that this is a rather expensive person. It would hardly look luxurious now, shower her with gold and diamonds. A strict suit sat perfectly on her slender figure, and stiletto-heeled loafers emphasized the beauty and length of her legs. The small jewelry would have gone completely unnoticed, but it emitted such a bright glow that it seemed to outshine the light of the lamps. Looking at her sleek black hair, Christina suddenly remembered the warlike Indians. The girl was very pretty, but not very friendly. She did not think of answering Christina's greeting. The business lady's face remained impassive and fearless. Just as abruptly as she had just stopped, the girl turned around and slammed the door loudly. Despite the fact that the appearance of this one especially had perfect upbringing was absent there, Christina could tell that as a professional nanny or caregiver. Never. A man who solves business issues by acquiring bunnies shouldn't get his nose above his own head. Christina's musings were interrupted by the voice of her boss. "Come in, my dear young lady." It was a pity that he saw her. It would have been much easier if Max didn't know that someone had unwittingly witnessed his conversation with the business lady. One good thing. He now knows that the nurse came strictly at the appointed time, not late and disrespectful. On the sea to life, Max watched carefully as Christina entered the office and took a seat on the couch. Looking at his face, it was hard to imagine that just a minute ago passions were raging here. He seemed indifferent, unperturbed, cold, and powerful, trying not to give away the shyness that had appeared from some unknown source. Christina said hello. Max answered her and pointed to the table that stood near his desk. He waited patiently for the girl to get up from the couch and move closer. "Max spoke before you, and I signed the documents. I would like to make it clear, if you even once again allow yourself to get up and walk out without listening to me to the end, Like you did in the interview, we're gonna have to break up. I'm the only one making the decision here. When will this conversation be over? That's understandable. He looked her straight in the eye without hesitation. Christina realized she wasn't mistaken. Her boss was not only a terrible bore, but also a tyrant. She realized that no position, even the most prestigious one, was worth it if someone could afford to talk like that. Better to walk and starve. She was about to open her mouth to say all the thoughts that were whirling through her head. But when she looked into his eyes, she could only shyly apologize. Max nodded approvingly, signaling that the subject was closed, and just as coldly, offered again to discuss all the terms of cooperation. The man listed the responsibilities of the caregiver and named the amount of monthly payments he would receive. Christina takes care of his mother. The sum exceeded any expectations of the girl. She tried her best to hide her unexpected joy. It would look unseemly and certainly unprofessional. Max would hardly be pleased. Finding out that his mother's new caregiver had once slaved for pennies, Christina quickly put a neat little signature on the proposed documents. An attentive person could recognize a lot from the handwriting for what it was. She was completely at ease. Smooth, neat lines could only give away the girl's poise, collectedness, and integrity. Well, now it was time to familiarize himself with Helen's schedule. For the first time ever, a note of uncertainty and doubt slipped into his intonation. Why it happened became clear in a few seconds. A heavy folder appeared on the table in front of Christina. Max offered to familiarize himself with the papers and allowed to ask questions if necessary. Frankly speaking, the girl was afraid to seem overly curious. After she had received the first beating from her boss, she decided that she would just read everything she was given and do without another dialogue. But she couldn't fulfill the promise she'd made to herself. When she opened the first sheet, she immediately raised her head and looked at her boss with surprised eyes. "Your mother speaks Chinese." Do not be surprised, Christina. It was promising in the years of her youth and the profession obliged. But today it's hard enough for her to give up her old habits. Now more than half the world speaks the language, and she doesn't want to be left behind. Don't worry, you can talk to her in English. All you have to do is take her to a tutor. Christina went back to reading, and as she turned the pages, she felt more and more pity for her ward. Her day was scheduled almost minute by minute. The girl's introduction. Old age is when you sit in a rocking chair by the plate, watch TV, and occasionally solve crossword puzzles, and not spend the only free minutes to say goodbye to one teacher and get to the next. The girl's imagination had already painted the face of a sad old woman who was being forced to attend classes to keep her sanity. However, she had no idea what an active woman she was to meet. Helen was burning with the desire to live and could not imagine that she would sit at home and watch Malakov's show on TV. While Christina was carefully reading all the documents that were in the folder, Max was silently watching her. It seemed that he was trying to read the girl's thoughts and look into her soul. The man nodded impatiently with his pencil and the desk top of his desk. Once the girl had read everything that was presented to her, she decided that she could make her own point. Do you really think all this is necessary for a woman of her age who has undergone a major operation? The pencil with which he was beating out the rhythm flew sharply to the other side of the table. He looked at Christina with an annihilating look and said, "Her daughter needs this." Christina and her new boss went to meet Helen at the airport. The car was driven, of course, not by Max, but by his driver, a mature, respectable man who seemed to be fused to the steering wheel and paid no attention to anything but what was happening on the road. Max's mother was returning today from a clinic in Germany. There she had undergone heart surgery and spent several weeks in rehab. As soon as Max got in the car and buckled up, he was instantly engrossed in his laptop and completely immersed in his work. He wasn't interested in how long their drive was or if they would make it in time for the plane to arrive. All the most important things were happening on his computer right now. Looking at the expression on his face, Christina decided that her boss was checking the morning mail or solving a problem of incredible proportions. However, she did not rule out the possibility that he might be corresponding with the person who had loudly called him a fool and an idiot yesterday morning. Max was so fascinated by what was happening on the other side of the screen that he never once took his eyes off it. He continued to work while they sat in the waiting room at the airport. The computer was turned off only when the arrival of the flight on which his mother was arriving was announced, and the hall began to fill up, with people waiting and meeting. Then the man finally turned off his laptop and put it in his bag. His cold face trembled and moved as the doors began to open, and the passengers of the arriving flight appeared in the hall. Christina could not believe her eyes. Could this unapproachable man of stone really smile? She carefully followed his gaze and saw that a rather busy couple appeared on the horizon. A pumped-up man in dorm mooring jeans, which seemed to tear from the slightest movement, and a girl in a t-shirt with a smiling kitten drawn on it. Following them came a wheelchair. There was no doubt who sat in it. Black eyes shone half a face the same as Max's. Christina correctly assumed it was her boss's mother. And in front of her walked her daughter and her boyfriend. "Son," the woman shouted loudly, finding Max with her eyes. She even seemed to be bouncing in her chair with impatience. It must be said that she loved her son very much, and he reciprocated. There was an invisible bond between them, which is rarely preserved between children and parents. "Who is that with her?" Christina asked. She wanted to see if her hunch was correct or if she was wrong. "That's my little sister Maria." Cervantes is always looking for adventure, not only for herself, but also for others. That's why Mom has such a busy schedule. Maria is sure that if you just let her relax, Mom will go crazy and will bore everyone with her moralizing and simple boring. Max answered the new caregiver's question exhaustively. Christina noted that the phrase about boring was just right. By the way, if this quality was possessed by Helen's son, I see from whom it was passed on. Meanwhile, Helen said something angrily to her son-in-law. The expression on her face accurately conveyed any emotion. Therefore, it was easy to guess that the woman was angry. However, the man didn't even turn a deaf ear. He continued to walk confidently toward his lover's brother. Angry at the lack of attention, Helen pulled something from her pocket that looked distantly like a remote control. She easily pressed the button and smiled. It didn't take long for the people around her to react. The suitcase that Alex, Max's sister's boyfriend, was carrying started to move. It vibrated and shook, bouncing, snapping. It was as if inside it had just come to life, something big and strong. Or something. From surprise, people scrambled from the side, looking around in confusion and just in case, trying to get away from the suspicious suitcase, and at the same time from the man who was carrying it. The strong, muscular man frowned and looked at his mother-in-law with a slight reproach. There's a reason they say old people are like children. Alex and Max looked at each other quickly and nodded satisfactorily. It seemed that only Christina did not understand what was happening and where she had gotten to. Someone from among the passengers and greeters loudly shouted terrorists, and panic left the whole hall. Some called the police. Others grabbed the children in their arms and rushed to the exit. 2 policemen on duty were rushing towards Alex. On the way, they even forgot their breakfast and grabbed the holster quite in the side of the neck. Calmly, in a loud voice, said Alex. To be honest, his voice, thick bass, which would be envied by the most famous opera singer, was clearly not intended to inspire calmness and confidence in the surrounding. As expected, the panic only grew larger around the man with the suitcase. Abruptly, an empty space was formed. In the hall where the people from the airplane had just entered. It was hard to imagine such a thing. People were trying to run as far away as possible, and those who had not yet had time to leave the plane crowded at the doors and caused the formation of a real jam. Those who had already entered the hall, expectations with horror rolled backwards, and the rear ones, not understanding what was happening and why they were not allowed into the hall, on the contrary, strived forward. It seemed that only a second had passed, but Helen was not next to Alex. She could be in danger because the woman was in a wheelchair and could not stand up for herself. However, Max was surprisingly calm. Everything seemed to be going according to his plan, and he was even enjoying himself. The man did his best to keep an indifferent expression on his face, but the corners of his lips treacherously turned upward. It was enough to realize that what was happening in the hall gave him incredible pleasure. His eyes were filled with pride. Yes, it was pride. Christina shook her head fearfully, trying to push away the thought that her new boss was not only a bore and a tyrant, but also a madman. "Where is your mother, Max?" Christina tried her best to shout out the crowd in the waiting room and draw attention to herself. But her boss didn't even turn a deaf ear. Of course, a stone wall would not pay attention to a mere nurse. Meanwhile, the situation with the suitcase, inside of which seemed to live something big, stronger, and more frequent, developed quite rapidly. Realizing that in order to calm the crowd, the only thing left to do was to open the suitcase and show the contents to those around him. Alex did exactly that, and it didn't bother him at all that his mother-in-law's power of attorney had disappeared somewhere. He lowered the bag on the floor and only touched the lock, as everyone heard a hysterical scream. The man didn't pay any attention to those around him. He just pulled the zipper. And that's when the suitcase on the floor really exploded. Multicolored things flew out of it: dresses and sweaters, handkerchiefs and plates. Expensive clothes bought by Helen during the whole time of her stay in Germany. It should be noted that before the scheduled surgery, she had the opportunity not only to visit expensive brand stores, but also to buy things from the latest collections of famous designers. Her son never spared money for his mother and always fulfilled any of her whims. A turquoise Panama, bought in one of the boutiques, landed neatly on Alex's head. It was neatly laid on the square bald head, which made Alex immediately seem to be a short-sighted and slightly ill man. The man stared at the arriving policeman. One was trying to pull a lacy blouse off his shoulder. The second one helped, and both law enforcement officials strained to see who was the culprit behind their ridiculous appearance. At the bottom of the suitcase on the floor was a toy excavator. The device not only imitated the sounds of real construction equipment, but also rhythmically lowered and raised the bucket. It seemed that such a joke was worthy of a 5-year-old child. But no, it was organized by a grown woman who only a few weeks ago managed to avoid a heart attack. At that moment, an unfamiliar voice sounded very close. But Christina immediately realized who it belonged to. Helen drove up in her chair quite briskly. "Well, hello, son." Max bent down to give his mother a hug, a kiss. She guided his neck with beautiful manicured hands. If Christina hadn't seen the woman's face, she would have easily declared that the hands belonged to a well-groomed young girl. On the ring finger of her right hand was a thin gold ring, most likely a wedding band. On her left hand, the woman had a neat white gold bracelet. And on her finger, Christina noticed a diamond ring. The man was so happy to see his mother that he was ready to pick her up in his arms and hold her close to him. But the wheelchair prevented him from doing so. Helen snuggled into the neck of her own son and pronounced, "I missed you very much. I really missed you." Looking at this touching scene, Christina deep down envied both Max and his mother a lot. She had never received any affection or love. She didn't remember her mother. And the teachers of the orphanage did not have enough time or mental resources. Max muttered quietly that he missed his mother too. And his new employee stood next to him and could not believe that her boss was capable of affection and tenderness. It turns out that it's not always a stone wall. That's how Christina began to call her new boss. Can only speak with a cold voice full of ice and gnashing metal. It was amazing to hear the softness and warmth coming from Max's lips. He was completely different from the man who yesterday morning had spoken haughtily to Christina in his office and reprimanded her for allowing herself to stop the interview without his approval. The mask of arrogance quickly fell away with the appearance of the mother. It took its toll on the nurse. Like a blow under the breath, Max smiled genuinely at Helen, and therefore looked several years younger. Christina figured he must be even less than 30. Earlier, when his expression remained cold and haughty, and when his eyes shone with incredible self-confidence, Max looked much older. It gave him a great deal of importance. Now that there was no one else to demonstrate it, it turned out that this man was not just attractive, but damn handsome. The nurse couldn't literally take her eyes off him. She liked literally everything about his swarthy cheekbones, his dimpled chin, his powerful neck, which seemed to be tight in the collar of his shirt. The girl had the urge to undo a few buttons and stroke the mark left on his skin by the stiff fabric. And then she would rise up on her toes and gently touch his lips with hers. So full and firm, she timidly raised her eyes and met his eyes. Big, moist black ones that inspired fear in them. Christina felt as if she had been hit with ice water. She couldn't believe that all those thoughts that rushed through her head in a hurricane were her own. The remnants of sanity. It was the suitcase situation that decided her. She imagined what she would have to endure while working with Helen. And if she had the nerve to make a childish spectacle of herself in the waiting room of an international airport, just to make her own son smile. Christina turned away abruptly, in the back of her mind berating herself for letting her own brain shut down. She's a mere nanny to his elderly mother, just a caregiver. He's a Stonewall, a rich man willing to pay for her labor just for that. He'll have a whole bunch of them, and each one will be ready to look into the mouth of her handsome boss. And for love and everything else, he has a business lady in a strict suit. Her condition. The girl wrote it off as mild stress and a momentary freak out. "How are you feeling, my sweet mom?" In a gentle voice, Max asked, "I think your prank is a direct confirmation of your full recovery. Or didn't you know how to show off the outfits you bought?" The man laughed loudly and his mother laughed back. For a moment, while they were busy with each other, Christina allowed herself to calm down and cool down. And only then did she allow herself to turn around. Mother and son kept their identical black eyes on each other. The whole world seemed to cease to exist for the two of them. And only the new nurse had the opportunity to watch this touching scene as long as she wanted. They were alike, and it wasn't just the eyes. Max had a high forehead and a flat nose and a stubborn chin, all of which he had inherited from his own mother. Even someone who was not distinguished by special knowledge, the gnomish physicist would easily determine that no one in the sight of this couple should hope for pardon. It was then that Christina realized that the fabulous salary that Max had been assigned was not all that great. While Max and his mother were enjoying each other's company, Maria and Alex were busy packing, scattered all over the room. As soon as the suitcase was closed, Alex led away for questioning the people, who until a few minutes ago were thrashing around the hall in search of shelter, again began to walk measuredly and leisurely from corner to corner. Some were waiting for the arrival of the next flight, others, on the contrary, a short time before the departure of their own airplane. The only reminder that recently there was panic and chaos in the hall was Panama, which Alex did not put away in his suitcase, but put on Maria's head. Finally, Max took his eyes off his own mother and turned his attention to Christina. He pointed his finger at her and said, "Meet Christina. This is Christina, your nurse. As long as you live in my house, this girl will accompany you everywhere and help you with anything you need." Helen took her time, turned her neatly tucked head toward Christina, smiled sweetly, and slowly reached out. "But hello, Christina." The tone, the way he spoke. The voice was eerily familiar to the girl, and the look in those big black eyes. Now there would be two of them, young and old. And somehow it seemed that the old woman would be much more trouble than her son. If Christina had not seen with her own eyes the picture of which Helen had become the artist, the girl would have been sure that she was incredibly lucky to have a job. From the outside, her mentee appeared to be the embodiment of charm, elegance, and grace. But beneath the appearance of an elderly angel lurked the nature of a real devil. It should not be forgotten that her son, under every whim and every prank of his mother, did not react in any way except his own smile and loud laughter. One could conclude that the antics that had paralyzed the airport today were in the order of the day with this pair of accomplices. Not even a second passed while these thoughts flashed through Christina's mind. She had time to think about everything in the world, while Helen turned her face from the nurse to her son. "My sweetheart, you said I look healthy, didn't you?" In response to his mother's questions, Max nodded affirmatively. "So explain it to me. A healthy woman is full of vigor. What did you hire this beautiful girl for?" She was the one he didn't tolerate any objections. She seemed to demand an exhaustive answer to her question immediately. "Do you really have a nurse? You strong, healthy man has a nurse who follows you around and gives you a spoon or a piece of toilet paper." At this point, Max artistically coughed, trying to suppress another fit of laughter. I'll be honest with you, sweet mom, that I don't have a caregiver. It was hard to say that the son was being honest with his own mother. Surely she knew nothing about the business lady who was still loudly deciding business matters in Max's office yesterday morning. Then I'll ask you another question that is especially important to me. Why do I need to be strong? And most importantly, healthy? I need a nurse. The phrase sounded triumphant, and Helen gave Christina a glare. This woman had an ironclad logic. At times, she reminded Christina of a 5-year-old child. The prospect of working in this family seemed less and less bright by the minute. Aren't we having breakfast together today? My darling. Helen sat in the chair and tugged her son's pant leg, trying to get his attention. Yes, mommy, of course. We will definitely spend time together, but only after I get home from work. I'm sorry, I have a lot of errands, meetings, negotiations scheduled for today. So you'll have breakfast with Maria and Christina. And maybe Alex, if his domestic orderlies will let you go after your prank. Max laughed again, but quickly pulled himself together. Work. Helen stretched out in a disappointed voice and sighed heavily. Her eyes childishly filled with tears and her lower lip moved forward involuntarily. For a moment, Christina felt funny, but she held back, and Helen did too. She just shook her head angrily. Mom, you realize I can't give up my business and stay home with you. Then we'd have nothing to eat, and we'd have to sell that adorable hat. He smiled slightly and pointed to the Panama, in which Maria was still standing. The girl was at a loss. She was anxious to meet her mother's new nurse. But she was more worried about the young man who had promised to marry her yesterday. And today he'd been taken away by the police to testify. Give me your word of honor that you'll spend dinner with your family, the woman said flatly. I promise I'll be home, and I won't say a word about work tonight or tomorrow morning. And I'm at your disposal. Sweet Maman, Max theatrically bowed to his mother. Well, that means we'll have to entertain Christina without you. She gave the nurse a thoughtful look. That didn't sound good. Something told Christina that only one of their small group would be having fun. Nevertheless, the girl leaned over her ward and, trying to seem attractive and friendly, said, Hello, Helen. I am very glad to meet you. I don't think we'll be bored. I wasn't going to be bored. The nice woman replied and smiled that strange smile that inspired the people around her. A quiet horror. Christina felt a chill run down her spine. If earlier she had thought that adult and elderly women spent their leisure time in cultural institutions or at home, then today, after the joke of her ward, realized that she was deeply mistaken. It was possible that she would come up with something new, equally fun. And most likely, that activity would not be on the list Max had provided her. As Christina, Helen, and Max approached the car, everyone suddenly remembered Maria and her lovers. The boss's mother was already sitting in the car, and the driver was stowing the chair in the trunk, when the woman asked in a completely innocent voice what had happened to Alex and if he would go with them. Quietly enough so his sister wouldn't hear. But clearly Max said that he was a grown man and would solve his problems on his own. He, meaning Max, would not be involved in any way. Men always disliked each other and treated each other with a kind of jealousy. Max was not happy about the fact that his sister favored this not-soon-jump-in-tight jeans. Besides, Alex was constantly on the lookout for himself, and his sister regularly borrowed money from him. Alex did not like Maria's mother very much either. She preferred to see next to her daughter someone like her own son, as masculine and handsome, with business acumen and flair. They are circus performers who were kicked out of the arena. That's why the object of Helen's jokes and mockery was regularly Alex and not anyone else. Why are you doing this, Max? Christina was somewhat indignant. She did not know all the subtleties of relations within the family, and therefore felt indignation. The boss only looked at Christina with cold eyes, and the girl realized that she was facing a stone wall again. The effect of Mom's joke was over. Unbelievable. His mother is putting on a circus on the grounds of the international airport. But he only laughs and not a word of reproach in her direction. Alex, the injured party, will have to deal with what happened. He was just unlucky to carry that damn suitcase. Christina realized that she would not stay in this place for long. As soon as Max thought that she was not a professional, and he had his own scale of criteria for evaluation, the boss would put her out on the street with no severance pay. The three of them drove home Helen, Max, and Christina. Maria stayed at the airport to rescue Alex, who seemed to be tortured at the police station. Max drove the car by himself. Where had the driver gone? No one but the chief knew, and Christina didn't bother to ask. She realized that asking unnecessary questions while staying in this family was strictly forbidden. Helen seemed to have turned into a child again. She suddenly laughed and began to talk about how the suitcase in Alex's hands had burst. No, you heard it all at once. And oh, where to run, what to do. I'll tell Lisa today. She'll laugh. And Lisa, the maid at Max's house who'd been working for him for over 10 years. She was a grown woman who had become a member of the family. Her boss liked her a lot, executive, responsible, never asks too many questions and gets things done quickly, and had become friends with his mother. Helen seemed particularly pleased with herself right now, and Christina's boss liked that. He was one of those kids who did everything possible and impossible to please their elderly parents. They usually feel that every second of life can be the last. Therefore, let it be filled with joy and fun. Phew, but I did it for something. It turned out that Max is not as hopeless as it seems at first glance. He asked questions without taking his eyes off the road. Max, what did I do? I mean, the backhoe turned on. I'm sure it was Maria who put the toy in my suitcase by accident. I found the remote control in my jacket pocket. To be honest, I mistook it for the one that came with my chair. You know, the doctor said that if I get tired, I can change the position under my elbow or pillows near my neck. Helen quickly turned the conversation to another topic, hoping that her son would be quickly distracted, concerned about his own mother's comfort and convenience. Max, however, was relentless. He continued to ask his mother leading questions and enjoyed watching her try to extricate herself from the situation. Helen, anxious, thrashed in her chair. Once again, she reminded Christina of a child who had given birth and was now trying to get away with it. Okay, son, I'm sorry. I just really missed you. All right. I'll apologize too. The mother realized that there was no point in trying to get away with it anymore, so she admitted her own guilt. But it didn't upset her in the slightest. Tell me, please, were you fed on the plane? The doctor told me that you need to eat by the hour and be sure to take the prescribed medication. Max realized that it was time to end the conversation with the circus performance, so he turned to the questions that really bothered him. Yes, son, they served fish, which, as you know, I can't stand. The obliging stewardess tried her best to feed me, but when she realized it was useless, she put my portion in a box and made sure I picked it up on the way off the plane. Helen's story was fascinating. She seemed to like the attention of others and was making a maximal effort to keep it as long as possible. It's okay, we'll get there. And I'll be sure to feed Zeus. Finished the monologue with the boss's mom. Christina had yet to meet Zeus. The big Caucasian sheepdog lived in the backyard in an aviary, and at night it was kept on the whole territory of the mansion, warning the owner in case of danger. The dog had lived with the owner since the house was built and had become a member of the family. If something had happened to Zeus, Max wouldn't have survived it. The company, consisting of the mother's son and her newfound nurse, reached home quickly enough and without any adventures. This especially pleased Christina, who had not yet had time to come to her senses after what she had seen at the airport. Helen, tired from the long flight and emotions, dozed off in the car. "We are home, Mom," solemnly declared Max, stopping the car at the gate. "Really?" Helen said, waking up. It hadn't even been 6 months. She demanded to be taken out of the car immediately and said that she would walk home. She's full of energy and completely healthy. And this chair was invented by the doctors to make her, and Helen believed that age is a judgment, and that the surgery she has undergone prohibits her from enjoying life and doing what she wants to do. On the way home, the mother walked leaning on her son. Helen looked like the ultimate conspirator and said she was going to show him her greatest treasure. "Mom, let's have your finds. Will you share with Christina?" I have no doubt that another diamond necklace with emeralds will be a splurge. Look with the dress that you showed in the morning to a good half of the waiting room. Now I'm really in a terrible hurry." Max tried with all his might to turn his mother's attention to Christina. Helen did not even turn her head in the direction of the nurse. It was a secret that concerned only her and her son. "I will appreciate your fine tonight. I swear to you," Max promised. Helen nodded contentedly and entered the house on her own, letting go of her son's hand. She held the lady's purse tightly in her hands. It was there that something of particular value to the woman was kept. Christina was visited by a feeling of slight envy. She always wanted a beautiful life, but the luxury for the girl was traveling by cab instead of streetcar or bus. One thing she did have, however. This piece of jewelry had no price. Her mother's earring, which was found near the crash site. The other one was never found, most likely burned with the body. Christina received the treasure on the day of her majority. The earrings were kept in the safe of the director of the orphanage, and the girl did not even suspect what gift the educators had prepared for her. The girl has always been on a good account. She did not enter into conflicts and always went towards helping everyone who needed it. "I hope you two will find common ground," grinned Max and returned to the car. Christina tried to assure him that she would find a common language with her mother, but she realized that it would be difficult and would take a long time. If someone asked the girl to make a rating of the most dangerous professions, the first on the list would be the position of a caregiver. Before meeting Helen, Christina was convinced that the ideal nanny for an elderly woman. However, Lady Perfection has failed. To please the new ward turned out to be quite difficult. If at the airport and in the car the woman was cheerful and actively participated in conversations, then it was worth it to cross the threshold of the house, as she became an exact copy of her son in the image of a stone wall. The woman silently drank a glass of water, drinking the prescribed medicine, demanded help to disassemble the suitcases, and stated that she wanted to stay alone. But no sooner had Christina left her ward's room than the door opened and Lisa, Max's housekeeper, appeared on the threshold. She seemed to Christina rather stern and not talkative, but not in Helen's company. The women, like two good old friends, hugged for a long time and even cried. After hugs, Lisa said that she was preparing a festive dinner and would be happy to see Lenotchka in her place of honor. Christina suggested to her ward to go downstairs and have something to eat. She remembered the morning conversation and realized that the woman still hadn't eaten. Helen, however, waved her head negatively and settled down on the bed. She defiantly turned away from Christina, and the girl, who had experience with such individuals, took a seat in the corner on a chair and opened a book lying on the table. The first thing that caught my eye, not the title written in Chinese, but the bookmark. An old photograph served for that purpose. On it, as Christina guessed, was Helen, and standing next to it were Max and Maria. So there had to be another child in this family. Strange, why hadn't he or she come to the airport to meet their mom? Christina would have given everything she owned in this world just to see her parents. She was so engrossed in the photo shoot that she started to look at the smallest details. Even then, Helen dressed beautifully and made sure that the children were neat and back. But the young and attractive woman had a light dress and a buildable fabric. It pulled her belly in nicely, drawing attention to it. Maria was dressed in a sundress and two long braids with white bows tied at the sides. Max, dressed in shorts and a shirt, even then looked like a real man who could be trusted with the whole world. The girl did not notice how the time flew by. She was immersed in her own memories and tears came to her eyes. Christina did not notice how loud the sobs knew and woke Helen. She was looking at the girl curiously and didn't understand why the new nurse seemed so familiar. Christina, on the other hand, looking at the details, recognized the earrings, a similar piece. She kept it carefully in the pocket of her purse, and on her birthday, she made sure to wear it when she was alone. Christina did not like noisy companies, and therefore, every year she bought a bottle of champagne and a cake, and celebrated the holiday alone. She took out the most elegant dress, did her hair, and put on her mother's earring. Despite the fact that she never managed to get acquainted with her own parents. The girl never tired of thanking them for the gift of life and sharing news and achievements. The girl understood that in those days it was very difficult to get beautiful jewelry, but she could not call this situation other than a coincidence. She wanted to ask Helen where the earrings had come from and whether she still had them, but she remembered that no one in this family liked unnecessary questions. Christina shuddered at the touch that brought the girl back to reality. Helen woke up. She slowly got out of bed and approached Christina. The woman didn't understand why the girl was so interested in the old photo. Yes, there were times when they were happy as a family. Back then, Helen, a young and beautiful mother of two, was waiting for the arrival of her youngest daughter. She and Greg, Father Max, were happy. Doctors said that after the birth of Maria, Helen was unlikely to be able to carry a baby again. But they were wrong. Returning from vacation, Helen complained more and more often of feeling unwell, nausea, and dizziness. But after a visit to the gynecologist, everything fell into place. She was given one of the most satisfying diagnoses ever. She will soon be a mom again. In gratitude for this joyful news, Greg presented his wife with a pair of exclusive earrings. There were simply no analogs of such a product. He personally drew a sketch and gave it to an acquaintance of the jeweler. Not everyone could afford such luxury. That evening, the couple left the children with a nanny. They sometimes invited a neighbor to look after Max and the little one, and went to the movies themselves. Helen and Greg were happy to know that they would soon be young parents again. Their financial situation and social status allowed them to raise another baby. 9 months flew by like a blink of an eye. Helen gave birth to a healthy, strong baby girl who looked like her father. It was decided not to take the older children to the discharge from the maternity hospital. Greg personally drove the car, and Helen held the baby girl in her arms. She didn't bother to buckle up. It was uncomfortable and hot. And her husband always drove the vehicle carefully. But not that day. The car skidded on a bend. It turned over several times and caught fire. Emergency personnel arrived on the scene and found the little girl requiring long-term treatment, while EMTs tried to get her parents out of the burning car. Helen and Greg spent a long time in intensive care, and there was practically no chance to save them. The doctors made a disappointing diagnosis, and therefore it was decided to transfer the girl, who miraculously managed to survive, to a baby home. The older children spent all this time with relatives. And when Helen and Greg came to their senses, they were informed that the little girl had died. The hospital staff decided that the young couple would have too much money to spend on their own recovery, and they had 2 more children on their necks. One of the nurses who was on call that day found an earring near the burned-out car, a rare piece of white gold jewelry. The honest girl handed the treasure to the workers of the baby home, where the girl was given, and asked it to be sure to pass the jewelry to her owner. After the child grows up, for the luck of the pupil in that orphanage worked teachers from God. When the girl reached adulthood, she was presented with an amazing gift, greetings from Mom and Dad from the other side of the world. Helen and Greg long experienced the bitterness of loss. Not only did they spend more than a year in hospitals and clinics, it took them even more time with psychologists. Helen's husband blamed himself for the accident that killed their newborn daughter. Helen tried with all her might to convince her husband that he was wrong. After 5 years of agony, Greg died. His heart could not withstand the constant pricking of his conscience. Dying, the father, who had lost his daughter, said that he was going to her, and the older children were left in the care of their mother. Despite the fact that more than 20 years had passed since that terrible accident, Helen remembered everything that had happened to them. She regularly went to the cemetery where her daughter and husband were buried, bringing flowers and toys. When her son announced that Helen was going to Germany for surgery, the woman was outraged and she couldn't leave just yet. Her dead daughter's birthday was coming up and Helen was bound to visit her grave and talk to the little girl. Max assured his mother that he would drive himself to the cemetery and take whatever his mother said. Frankly, he thought it was time to stop taking what had happened 20 years ago so seriously. Helen arrived in Germany a few days early. She had expressed a desire to go shopping in malls and furniture stores. Her son's financial situation allowed her to buy anything she liked. During one of the shopping trips, Helen stumbled upon an antique shop quite by accident. Her son loved antiques, and the woman knew how to make him feel good. She was perusing the display cases and racks when she saw earrings on one of the shelves. The woman immediately forgot about gifts for her son and began to think about what kind of dress she could wear with this or that set. Her attention was attracted by a single piece of jewelry. When Helen took a closer look, her whole life seemed to flash before her eyes. She immediately remembered the day when Greg, her late husband, had given her earrings based on a unique design. She remembered the accident and her husband's agony. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Please tell me, where is the second earring? I would like to buy this set." She turned to the seller of the antique shop. "This earring is sold alone for more than 10 years, lying on the counter, and does not cause anyone's interest. Can you imagine? Everyone wants a set. It is understandable." The seller was genuinely surprised that someone was interested in this product. The earring was brought to the store many years ago by a woman. She did not know the history of this product. She only said that she had found it on the street and wanted to get some money. Since then, the white gold earring with a small scattering of diamonds lay on the counter and did not arouse interest among customers until Helen stepped over the threshold. At that moment, she was ready to give any money just to buy what was once rightfully hers. It seemed that this purchase would give her back a piece of the past, bring back memories of those days when they were all happy, when she had her little girl in her arms and knew that Papa, her older brother, and sister were waiting for them eagerly at home. It was about this discovery Helen had been so eager to tell her own son, the businessman, and that man. And now when she woke up to find her new caregiver, Christina, scrutinizing photos of the family and crying bitterly. "What's the matter? Baby, did a picture of my whole family happy upset you so much?" Helen asked politely. "Hugging a girl?" Christina not only didn't expect her ward to wake up so unexpectedly, but also didn't think that the woman would take part and ask what was the reason for her sudden tears. No one had ever been so polite to the girl. She could no longer hold back her emotions. The girl cried and told everything that had happened to her in her short but so bitter life. The girl knew that, most likely, after such an act, the owner would ask her to leave her post as a caregiver. But she could not help herself. Tears rolled from her eyes without stopping. She told Helen that she had grown up in an orphanage and had not known parental love and affection, that she had had to work from an early age to make ends meet, and now she had to look after other people's parents to earn her bread. She regretted very much that she had never seen her own father and mother. Helen clasped the girl tightly to her breast and whispered, "Well, will you be good to cry? We all have a hard life." And then Helen began to tell her story. When she reached that period of her life, when she experienced the joy of motherhood for the third time, the woman could not resist and cried too. She decided that she could open up to this bright, defenseless girl. Helen opened her handbag and took out an earring. "Look, it's from my past. My late husband gave me the earrings for giving him a daughter. She died in a terrible accident, and her husband died a few years later, couldn't bear the loss a few weeks ago. I saw this earring by chance in a store overseas. I know I can't be wrong. This set was one of a kind and unmatched. My husband made them especially for me." Christina listened to the story of this amazing woman and could not believe her own ears. Was it really true? The girl slowly stood up and walked to her bag. Helen looked questioningly at her nurse and did not understand what was going on. Didn't understand exactly until the girl pulled out the exact same earring. The set was connected. Both of them stood in the middle of the room and looked at each other, not understanding what was going on. No, both Christina and Helen made a logical connection in their heads, but couldn't believe that this was really happening to them. And it's not a dream. "My daughter, my sweet girl. All these years I've mourned you and carried toys and presents to the cemetery. And you're here, alive and well," cried Helen, hugging and kissing the one she wanted to send away 2 hours ago, just to convince her son that she didn't need a nurse. They spent the entire afternoon like that. When Max got home, he was concerned as to why his mother still hadn't gone downstairs, and handed out directions to anyone who would come across her path. The man went up to the second floor and froze in front of the bedroom door that was meant for Helen. He heard someone crying in the room, and without even waiting for someone to answer his knock, he entered abruptly. the man was genuinely surprised to see his mother. The strong and unapproachable woman was sitting on the bed next to Christina, a simple nurse who had been hired for the job only yesterday. It was hard to imagine that someone could melt her heart in such a short period of time. "Mom, what's going on here?" "Christina, please explain to me why a woman who's just had surgery is in a state of hysteria. You were tasked with keeping her calm and happy, and you are completely failing in your duties." The stone wall spoke, and there was no way to stop it. Max was angry and preparing to fire the caregiver he had just hired. "No severance pay. Christina, you can pack up and leave this house. You're fired." He said those words in his usual cold voice. There was no trace of the man who had laughed at his mother's stupid jokes that morning. "Max, stop. First, let us explain to you everything that happened. And then we'll see if you can fire someone or take it back." Helen's voice sounded equally harsh and cold, and so the son simply froze. The first thing the woman in Serbia showed him was a picture of Helen's mom standing exactly in them. The son knew the story that once long ago his father had given his mother a unique gift. Few people in those days could please their spouses with exclusive white gold earrings. He also knew that those earrings had been irretrievably lost during the terrible fire in which their little sister had died. And now, when he saw them in his mother's hands, the man was speechless. He couldn't believe his own eyes and didn't want to believe his own ears. Until his mother told him that she had found the second earring in one of the stores. Max was sure that Christina had simply made up the story. But there was nothing to reproach her for. Everything really did match up. Could it be that this girl, who as recently as yesterday morning had returned tail and allowed herself to assert her own point of view, had turned out to be his own sister? The girl who years ago, they all believed, had died in a car accident. The man's eyes filled with tears. He let his feelings come out, hugged Christina, and asked for her forgiveness. He had no idea what to say in such situations, so he simply apologized. He felt guilty for speaking rudely to Christina during the interview and at the airport. Max realized he had become completely confused. "My favorite girls, pull yourselves together. We are waiting for a wonderful holiday dinner, prepared and Lisa." Imagine her hysterics as she finds out that Helen suddenly has a grown-up daughter. Max laughed. He hugged his mom and sister and motioned for them to come downstairs. As they opened the door, they heard Alex and Maria enter the house. "Let's not say anything to them yet. Let Maria show her sister what she can do." Max laughed and winked at his mother. "Don't worry, no one will give you offense in this house. But I must say that your sister is a very spoiled person. She doesn't tolerate competition, and she's used to having all the attention in this family," Helen warned. She still couldn't believe that this was happening to her, that the daughter she had mourned and thought dead for over 20 years was alive and standing next to her. There were hysterical screams coming from the first floor. Maria was sharing the events of the day. It turns out that Alex had spent all that time in the police station. He was proving to the law enforcement representatives that he had nothing to do with terrorist organizations, and what happened was just a stupid joke. His future mother-in-laws. Maria met Alex a few years ago. Then her mother insisted that Max paid for her sister's trip to a foreign camp. The girl was going through a breakup with her first love and badly needed positive emotions. Her son did not argue with Helen, but simply gave as much money as was needed to pay for the vacation and flight. Maria had a wonderful 2 weeks there, enjoying socializing with her peers and being under the close supervision of psychologists. To the surprise of the family, Maria did not pull any tricks, but she surprised everyone by the fact that after arriving home, she continued to communicate with one of the same vacationers. His name was Alex. His parents sent the boy on vacation after a hard study. Returning from the camp in France, Alex soon appeared on the doorstep of the house where Maria lived and said that he could not live without her. To say that the relatives were dumbfounded, nothing to say. Even Maria was in a slight shock. However, the young people made a promise not to do anything stupid and kept it for several years. Between them, more and more often began to talk about marriage. And a few months ago, Alex introduced Maria to his parents. They spent 2 weeks in France, from where they flew to Germany and returned with Helen. It was hard to explain why Maria and Max's mother didn't take this man seriously. His appearance truly resembled that of a clown. When Helen decided to pull a prank at the airport, she had no idea where it would lead. Maybe it was for the best. Let the guy learn to get out of difficult situations on his own. Especially since life together with her daughter is a series of difficult situations and endless adventures. Alex spent the whole day today to explain to the police in broken English that he is a good French citizen who came to visit his fiancée's family. The difficulty was that Maria was not allowed into the office until she had legal status. Spouses have no right to take part in investigations and proceedings. However, it was money that helped them cope with the difficulties. Thanks to her brother, Maria never needed it. No, she didn't sit on her brother's neck. Maria held a decent position in his company, and it should be noted, reached this position. Not through family connections, but only through her own knowledge and skills. Max always reprimanded her severely in meetings. If the occasion arose, but also honestly praised her for her professional accomplishments. The only indulgence that the boss allowed himself to regularly please his sister was a salary an order of magnitude higher than that of her colleagues. This topic was off limits for discussion in the office. The employees knew that Max did not tolerate gossip. The man was always ready for open conversations and boldly responded to any complaints from the employees. If he noticed that someone was whispering in the corners, he always called for a conversation, which was usually followed by dismissal. When the passion downstairs had subsided, Christina and Helen went down to the first floor. "Hello, mine," never waning. The mother said wryly to Maria, "Do you have any idea what Ali Mom had to go through? Why did you make this circus? Explain it to me, please." Max intervened in the conversation. He really liked the prank, and although he treated Alex respectfully, he didn't try to hide the fact that Mom came up with a funny prank. Everyone understood that for such a joke, a French citizen could be deported to his country without the right to return. Then Maria would have become the wife of a French Decemberist. Surely his sister would have boarded the first plane to Paris and sought a date with a persistent troublemaker. These thoughts made Max laugh. He laughed loudly, which caused astonishment among the others, and hurried to share his thoughts. After everyone had laughed quite a bit, Maria asked a very appropriate question. Since when would a simple caregiver sit at the table with them and listen to them indulge in family memories? Indeed, every dinner with the family, Max, Maria, and Helen was filled with warm conversations about their father, their childhood, and their family traditions. The children, as Helen used to call them, told her their secrets, and she, in turn, made a surprised face and made them believe that until now, she did not even suspect what had happened. Helen was in no hurry to please Maria with the fact that she had a younger sister, despite the fact that she had grown up a spoiled girl. She was kind and sympathetic at heart, and always responded warmly to her mother's requests to visit her sister's grave in the cemetery. When asked why Christina was given a seat at the table, her mother replied that she could get dizzy and had to get used to having someone there to support her and help her, but she was satisfied with that explanation. Despite the insulting grimace on her face towards Christina, she softened nonetheless. The girls assigned a seat next to Alex, who, despite the joke organized by Helen, arrived for dinner with a gorgeous bouquet of flowers for his future mother-in-law. He was still wearing too tight jeans. What caused another fit of laughter when he appeared on the doorstep? It seemed that today's surprises had come to an end, but it wasn't. The front door swung open, and the one who had swept past Christina yesterday and given her a less than welcoming look appeared on the doorstep. She seemed to have come straight from a business meeting. In another strict suit, styled hair, stilettos, and an unchanged file folder in hand. "Good evening. I'm sorry, I didn't realize Max had nice guests. We were supposed to spend the evening together, and especially frozen on the threshold because no one invited her into the house. And what's more, there were no dishes for her at the table." What was especially unlike Max, if he invited someone to visit, he was always zealous to make sure that the guest was comfortable. He didn't seem to care about the businesswoman's comfort at all. "Jenna, I think I've made it clear to you that I'm busy tonight." Max said these words in such a cold voice that Christina felt horror, just like the day of the interview. However, the whole situation brought joy to Helen and Max. Looking into his mother's eyes, let her enjoy talking to the unexpected guest. "Well, what are you, son?" heaping a girl on the doorstep. "Come in, dear Jenna. Visitors are always welcome in our home." Affectionately. "What was that?" Completely out of character for a mother, Helen said. She looked like a rainbow hostess now, ready to feed anyone. But Jenna had no idea what a dangerous trap she had fallen into quite willingly. "Meet Maria, my daughter Alex, and her boyfriend." "Well, Max, Christina." Helen did not have time to finish, as she saw on Jenna's face irritation and contempt. The girl immediately reported that she could not stand it when servants sit at the same table with the owners. She compared such behavior with the situation when an ordinary employee took part in important negotiations on an equal footing with the boss. By the way, Jenna was that ordinary employee. She brewed not the most delicious coffee and brought Max papers to sign. She got her position only because of her long legs and the beautiful, even smile of Max's partner. Solid men like to be greeted by a friendly girl. The tired, tortured secretary who had served the company since its inception and was the boss's right-hand woman. Helen, realizing that a stone had been thrown into the vegetable garden, her newfound daughter decided to remind the florist that she was just a simple rank and file employee who had just broken into a board meeting and was trying to take an active part. But the girl didn't even seem to pay attention to the remark. She was engrossed in trying to draw Max's attention to herself. Those sitting at the table suddenly looked at each other and laughed loudly. Everyone remembered the incident at the airport. Jenna sat, not realizing what was going on, and just drank water, courteously served, and Lisa, on the girl's luck, the housekeeper, brought dinner. And the family was somewhat distracted by the tweaking of the guest. When everyone was fed and satisfied, Alex asked permission to speak. Helen realized that something was about to transpire that she still wasn't ready to hear. Indeed, the young man confessed that he had loved her daughter for a very long time and wished Maria to become his lawfully wedded wife. He immediately hastened to assure the members of his new family that he had no intention of taking the girl to France. Alex applied for citizenship and even found a permanent job. A large company was actively looking for a professional, experienced programmer and was ready to pay decent money for Alex's knowledge. Maria cried from joy and surprise. She did not even suspect that her boyfriend was coming to USA not just for fun, but with the most serious intentions. The girl responded by agreeing to the marriage proposal and began to accept congratulations. At that moment, she allowed Christina to hug herself. If the mother has penetrated trust to this person, then she has nothing to share with the nurse. Jenna also allowed herself to make a congratulatory speech. The girl decided to take the initiative in her own hands and told those gathered at the table that she and Max were in a close enough relationship and could also announce the wedding. At that moment, you should have just seen Max's face. His eyes turned cold and angry. "Well, my son proposed to you, but he didn't tell me anything," Helen asked snidely. This person's statement did not cause her any emotion except laughter. The woman realized that her son was an intelligent and responsible man who could pay attention to a person like Jenna. Only in one single instance, she had never been a prude, and realized that it would be better to have a temporary relationship with such a doll than a year of loneliness. Maria jumped with laughter. She realized that after what Jenna had said, she would only have to pack her things from her desk and leave the company's walls forever. Christina also realized that. She was ashamed of herself, but the girl was even happy about this outcome. She did not like this businesswoman even before she ran into her in the lobby. Only Alex was indifferent to this story. He did not understand Russian speech well and laughed only because his future spouse did. Max got up from the table, approached Jenna, and sharply pushed her chair away. "I'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. In my office with a letter of resignation. I made no promises about our marriage. There's no need to mislead my family. They might think I'm crazy for deciding to commit my life to you." The girl blushed and, trying to object to what she heard, was quickly dispensed with. She didn't even say goodbye, jumped out of the house, slammed the door of her own car. It was heard how sharply she moved. Will there be any more news? Maria burst into laughter and couldn't stop. Helen said slowly, "Today, this news struck me to the core." Her voice a few minutes ago joyful suddenly became serious. "Mom, something happened in my heart. The operation didn't go well. What's the matter?" She wouldn't have survived if anything bad had happened to her mother. No, my girl is fine." Helen hurried to reassure her daughter. She asked everyone present to just listen carefully to the story the mother wanted to tell her children. When she started the story about how all the family was eagerly waiting for the birth of their sister, Maria exhaled. She was ready to listen to the story as many times as she wanted, knowing that her mother was okay. So Lisa brought a large pot of tea and joined the large family. She had long since become a full member of the family, but she never allowed herself to sit down at the table with everyone else. Only after dinner was served and the kitchen was in order, she made her favorite tea and let herself indulge in memories, along with everyone else. Helen spoke at length today, and with a special feeling, everyone at the table had tears running down their cheeks. It seemed that even Alex, who could hardly perceive Russian speech, was penetrated by the story. And there were quiet sobs. When the mother got to the point where she discovered an earring given by her father in a store in Germany, she cried. Christina allowed herself to intervene and continue the story, which caused Maria's surprise. Only Max seemed to remain calm. In his heart, he was uncontrollably glad that the girl for whom so many tears had been shed was alive and well. She had come to their house on her own. One should thank fate and God for that. Christina began her story, and not everyone could understand how it related to what Helen had just told. Couldn't understand until it was about the Serbs. The girl pulled 2 earrings out of the purse she had thoughtfully brought with her. It was them, the ones her mother had been looking at for a long time in the picture. Max had once suggested that she order the exact same ones from a jeweler. Helen flatly refused. She said she didn't plan to enter the same river twice. It was a memory of her father, and let it remain his memory forever. Then the son bought his mother an extraordinarily beautiful set of exactly that ring. This morning, Christina noticed the wart on her hand. Upon realizing what was happening, Maria cried, unashamed of her tears, and hugged Christina tightly. Through her tears, she laughed and stated that it was a good thing they didn't have time to socialize. She has a terrible temper, and now she would have to apologize for any rudeness for sure. Now she would only have to apologize for the fact that all this time none of them had known that she was the youngest and most beloved sister alive. The evening seemed to be endless. When the tea was finished, the whole family moved to the floor of the fireplace. The children surrounded their mother and had long conversations about what their lives had been like. Christina told much about her past. It was already Maria and Max. They were tormented by guilt that their sister didn't have everything she owned. As the time passed midnight, Helen declared that she was immensely tired for today. Even though she felt strong and healthy after the surgery, such a shock was not easy to bear. She went to bed and insisted that Christina would definitely spend that night in her bedroom. The girl promised that as soon as they got ready for bed, she would come to her mother's room. Alex also apologized and withdrew. He had not just endured a hard flight, but was having a hard time getting used to the time difference. No one dared to take offense at him. Maria and Max wanted to spend time alone with their sister. Max hugged his sisters and suggested to celebrate such an event with a glass of champagne. It was a real miracle, which happens only once in a lifetime. And then not everyone. Sitting at the table, they began to discuss the future. That Christina was moving into her brother's house. It was agreed without reservation. Then there was the question of who would take care of Mom. She needed a nurse again, a girl who had just found a family. She dreamed of it all her life. She declared that she wasn't going to quit her hard-won position. She and her brother laughed and told Maria about how hard it was to get an interview. Max's. They sat at the table in the kitchen for a long time, sipping champagne and making plans for the future. None of them so happy did not know that in the morning, when they woke up, life would not be the same. None of them suspected that the mother who had just found her dead daughter would not be able to stand such happiness. When Helen stated that she was tired and wished to go to bed, she was not lying. The woman was indeed feeling exhausted. Moreover, Her heart ached again, but Chisa did not want to spoil the children's joy of the family reunion. She reached the bedroom, sat down on the bed, and passed out. Helen didn't have time to take the pill that could have saved her life. The children discovered the body in the early hours of the morning, as they were escorting Christina to her new bedroom. No one knew that the next day a hurt Jenna would go to the police and file a report that Max had been molesting her regularly. No one knew the cops would come for Alex too. Money doesn't always solve problems. The case of the explosion at the international airport will not be so easy to solve. But all this will happen only tomorrow, when the new day comes. And today, these three were so happy, sitting at the kitchen table, drinking champagne, and could not believe that after 20 years their family was reunited. Max and Maria believed that the father had helped the children find each other. Before he died, he announced that he was going in search of his dead daughter. When the bottle of delicious French drink was drunk, the young people hugged each other tightly and decided to walk their sister to the bedroom in friendship.